we kind of see him manifesting this. It's one thing to think it, it's another thing to manifest. In England, Amy Ashwood Garvey, the first wife of Marcus Garvey, George Padmore produced a play called Stevedore, and it's intended to inspire the working class to more or less challenge the status quo in a workers' revolution against the ownership. He participated in it. After that, he did a play called Plant in the Sun. That was a much more militant message, Mr. Sitole. So he was being able to manifest. Welcome, Mr. Sitole, welcome. He was getting to the kind of work that he wanted, which was teaching class consciousness.
Who was William Patterson? You mentioned him a couple of times.
Yes, he was a member of the Communist Party. His wife is Louise Patterson. Yes, William Patterson was a...
He's American?
Yes, United States. Who wrote a biography of him?
Keith Gilliard.
Thank you. Did of the wife, but I think Gerald Horne did a work on William L. Patterson. Yes, it's not the first time that he mentioned him, that he wrote about him.
I know we have a period after this, but you mentioned Angela Davis and going outside of America to see America, to come back more infused, to change America. Like, what is that ingredient?
Where they have to go outside. That
Go
causes
outside.
them to
Right.
only see the issue or have a fire
The fire
ignited.
ignited outside and not.
I think when part of it is the admiration for U.S. culture by other people outside. And so when they see that in combination with that being stifled or affected by the social conditions they are learning about, Angela Davis and Paul Robeson, then they say, no, I have to use, like you were talking this morning about spaces in your space being sacred and having utility. I'm not just going to be singing to make my US dollar. What does the US dollar mean, or any dollar for that matter? I have to go back and make sure that there's utility to my gift, that my gift is used to close prisons, that my gift is used to maybe set one person free from prison, like Kim Kardashian using her fame to set Miss Johnson free, one person. I have to use, my gift for a greater service, for a function. So I think seeing how the U.S. is a rich culture, but you can't really see it sometimes unless you're away from it. The grass is greener, they say, on the other side. And you don't see it unless somebody points out to you, no, see, what you have is that. What we don't have, what we have is not that. And you see the difference. Robeson, this is a quote. So what you see is these quotes from chapter 4, okay? Robeson said, okay, I have 18 minutes. I want to make sure I stick to time. Robeson said, the New York Times with enthusiasm naturally outshone the large cast, and they're raving about his performance in England. Now, the reason I chose that fourth quote is because the New York Times would later attack him. This is in 34. But by 49, they're going to lead a bandwagon attempt to completely destroy his career. In the first chapter, he gives you the numbers. In the first chapter of Horne's book, he says that his income goes from some 10,000 to 2,000. I want to say it was like, if I find it, I'll find it. I'm not gonna... Yeah, it was like 20-something thousand in 1947 to 2,000, and that's a rough estimate by 1950, because of him saying Negroes should not fight in World War II as long as Jim Crow exists in the United States and the South. So the reason I think that's so relevant now is because part of the reason Trump is able to be as successful as he is because of the failure of welcome, Ms. Michael, so glad you can make it. Welcome. is because of the failure of the liberal media in terms of critiquing its own nationalism and its ethnocentricity, their inability to do that, and their fickle nature. I think the way Horne writes about the New York Times, for me, what jumped out at me is the fickle nature of the liberal media. Once you're good as their token, you're all right. But if you're a token and you start to have an opinion and form an opinion about the racist practices of the country, then you're persona non grata, and then you're thrown in by the liberal media. Then you're thrown into the category of enemy, which Robeson suddenly became. So the reason I put up that fourth quote from the Times is because I found it relevant to something I posted on Instagram earlier this year in March. That is a photo of the main editor of the James is his first name, the last name is escaping me. But this is a quote from him, and the quote of his says, "Times is in favor of capitalism," something that Robeson was not in favor while he was an artist whose consciousness was developing. "Times is in favor of capitalism because it has been the greatest it's been the greatest anti-poverty program and engine of progress we've seen." And that's simply not true when you think about the number of children that die from starvation and hunger in this country, when you think about the number of people incarcerated, when you think about the drug trade that the banks engage in from Colombia all up throughout the Caribbean, through Jamaica, this is simply not true. Capitalism creates poverty. It's not an anti-poverty program. But as long as Robeson was a black star who was thriving during the time of the Great Depression in the 30s, that kind of demolished any ability to develop wealth, then he was A-OK. But by 1950, he is persona non grata. Robeson's good friend Ben Davis denounced Standards of the River. I was telling Chris, this is the most important lesson of Robeson's life. An interview he did with Ben Davis in the mid-40s, 43, where Davis asks Robeson, "Why did you do that film? That film shows Africans in a negative light." And the reason I love that interview, and we'll read it when I get discouraged, is because Paul Robeson is so penitent, Aries man. He's so apologetic. He's so receptive. He's so willing to change. He's so, you're right, I didn't even think about it like that. And this is while he is still growing up. He admitted that what he taped on film, what the filmmakers wanted him in the original taping of Standards of the River, he plays this character called Bosambo, who is this African. But then he said there was edits that take place after he originally taped that he did not agree with. And after the edits took place, the film was different from what he had originally conceived. And when he saw the final edit, it made, as Ben Davis pointed out to him, the British look like angels and the Africans look like the savages that needed to be saved by these angels. So Robeson, for me, he's such a powerful example of a man in that interview with Ben Davis. It's a very humbling moment where he makes a vow more or less to do kind of what we read a few slides earlier. Make sure, like what Mrs. Corby told Harrison, that we're not being made a fool of, right? Like the way she thought Charles Gilpin made a fool of himself as Bruce Jones. Oh, welcome, Mr. Adams. So glad to see you, Mr. Adams. Royce Adams, who told me about Esther Cooper Jackson, who has a personal connection with her, who had a personal connection with Paul Robeson. So I'm so glad Mr. Adams can make it. So Robeson was regretful that he was in that film ultimately. And yeah, this is what Horne says, a phrase that I hold on to, I latch on to. After he admits that, Senders of the River was a slanderous attack on Africans. He, Robeson, makes a declaration, or no, Ben Davis makes a declaration with which Robeson asserted his agreement, right? And so I just carry that on. A declaration with which Robeson asserted his agreement. And when we talk about Robeson's relevance today, the relevance is that kind of penitence that Mr. Robeson showed before Ben Davis, the willingness to correct images of black men that denigrate black people, right? And there were a few examples of this that took place over the past month that I was telling Chris Rogers about. One of them was, I don't know if any of you have seen the music video by Nick Grant called Black Woman. And it is a beautiful music video that basically celebrates the beauty of black women. And he was interviewed by Sway, who is a popular radio host. And basically Sway asked Nick Grant, why don't you have European women? Why don't you have, are you trying to diss European women? And Black Twitter dragged Sway, as they rightly should have, for asking, why would you ask that question? Why are you trying to center, this man on the left, Nick Grant, wanted to celebrate black women, period. It had nothing to do with European women. He doesn't have to apologize, but because it was Sway's show, some platform of power Sway had, he wanted to say, well, I need you to look in the camera and tell all the women out there, you didn't just mean black women. Oh, that's what made people so upset. And I remember, I forget whose Twitter handle it was, but they said, this man Sway is a full-ass weirdo. And I agree.
You know, do you think that he wrote that question himself, or that he was
I think he wrote it and he was given it, or he was given it. And the main problem is that he chose to ask that.
Okay.
They say that he used, from what I read on Twitter, some of the comments, that he usually does that with all of his interviews, just try to throw some shit in the game.
Yes, shit in the game, right. You see, just to question the identity, but question how strongly Nick Grant knew himself. But I think Nick Grant answered powerfully.
And I think that that's the important thing, when we choose to do things consciously, is that, because that challenge comes up, I mean, that's the world we live in, that challenge comes up. And you can really see the worth of a man when he said, it ain't about them, it's about me. And that takes more courage than the even question.
Absolutely, it takes more courage. And that kind of courage, Sandy, is why I brought this up, because this is a good example of black audiences questioning the frame, right? The way Ben Davis questioned the frame, and I wish I had the brother who said Sway is a weirdo, because that guy who said that, who tweeted that, is questioning the frame. And the reason I have the image on the right is because those two men on the top, they created a film whose frame needs to be questioned. They wrote a film about Thurgood Marshall, which I was sharing with Sandy, what I thought was absolutely atrocious. The film focuses on a trial of an alleged rape of a white woman in suburban Connecticut by her servant, right? Her black male servant, but the film is named Marshall. Okay, well, what about his time? And then he wasn't even speaking, he didn't even deliver the most decisive argument in that film. So I'm not gonna write it because I have other things to do. But I have that image because Jacob Koskoff, and I think it's a father and son team, but my point is their frame desperately needs questioning. And they're writing about Marshall from a white European perspective that focuses Marshall's life on one trial where he was not even the lead attorney, and he was not allowed to make the opening and closing arguments. And so really, on a very deep level, somebody needs to interview Chadwick Boseman, who played Thurgood Marshall. and ask him the kind of questions that Ben Davis asked Paul Robeson. What are you doing in this film? Why are you participating in a film where we don't have agency and the arbitrary choice by the writers, you know, of somebody's life is a trial when they have no agency?
You see, we go back then to the consciousness. And so Chadwick is an actor. He's not a revolutionary, he's not a black activist, he's not even conscious. So he is doing his job, you know, in terms of, and not
His job.
for him, but his job is to act, to get roles, to play them well. He, you know, to get the Oscar, the Emmy, or whatever.
Which was different from Robeson's time.
Exactly.
Who was thinking about the implications of the
Right,
role.
and so we can't assume that everyone who use art as activism or art as revolution or art as, some people just do it and they want to get paid, they want to get fame, they want to get, so I think at some point then we need to start talking about consciousness and artists when you start talking about those jobs available for you. Like, what is an actor or actress, and what is your responsibility to your community, to your people, to your race when you accept that role? You know, we hold teachers we try to hold teachers accountable because we tell them as a teacher you are responsible for X, Y, Z. Where is that told when you go to acting school? Where is that told when you want to be an actor or whatever you want to be? It's no other place do we tell them what your role is or what your responsibility is.
And Robeson's responsibility was that I need to make sure that I don't promote imperialism.
Exactly.
And it was such an important interview, Sandy, because Robeson names the ill. The ill is imperialism. It's hard to find artists that name what the U.S. is doing in the world. You know, name the crime and say, I have to, that's my responsibility, if it's anything, is to stop that crime. That's my responsibility.
Empire or
Yes.
capitalism, you know, as it changes, or the frame changes. Now you said he's getting paid, so is it, you know, his role to bite the hand that feeds him?
And remember, you
That's
just
it.
told that Robeson grew into that.
Right.
So if somebody pulls his coattail, who's to say that he can't grow? You know
So
what I'm saying?
then he should be challenged, as you
Exactly.
said.
Yes.
Someone should ask him the same question.
Why are you playing
Right.
roles?
Right.
Right.
And tell them what it means.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up about Bozeman, and I know this is about Robeson, but since he's there, I just
Yes.
wanted just a little bit, because when Panther came out, Black Panther came out, there was a lot of people touting the fact that Chadwick Boseman went to Howard, and that he was raised, you know, basically worked on Georgia Avenue around some of the more conscious brothers and sisters that, you know, are now part of an organization, ASCAP. So that would be affecting the argument that you just made. Like, where's the consciousness when he did this versus now he's conscious and he does Panther? So is he wavering? What's Bozeman doing? And so that interview that you talked about with Ben Davis is important. The problem is we don't have people that are asking those types of questions of our artists now. We don't have these same types of platforms where they're giving the interviews, and even if you do talk to an artist, sometimes certain questions are off limits. They want to know the questions beforehand, and all that kind of stuff goes on.
Yeah, because I've encountered the wall when you're trying to talk to an artist, and you can tell you're the conscious type to ask them those type of questions, and they just get the wall. And it's like, oh well, one of the artists will respond and create a necessary. So I want to say that to encourage the black journalists, like this young man who calls Sway a weirdo, and like Kirsten Willis at the Atlanta Black Star. I think she does excellent work. Madame Noir, Victoria Wells, she wrote an article that I learned about this in Madame Noir. So, oh boy, 3 minutes, I want to try. This is another example of a film, written, the screenplay by a white woman, but the actors, similar to Chadwick Boseman in this case, Taraji P. Henson, Janelle Monáe, and Octavia Spencer, need to be asked about the frame. The frame, because there are parts in that script where the African American is taught to advance themselves by being subservient to the Jewish white person, and that's incorrect, historically not true. If anything, the European Americans have waited and have profited from the labor of African people. So I have the photo of Margot Lee Shetterly, who wrote Hidden Figures. And I know firsthand that, from people who worked on the film, that Miss Schroeder did not read Margot Lee Shetterly's book. And part of the demands artists and actors need to have on them is to demand that what they perform is informed. What they performed is written with an awareness and a knowledge of what hard work these writers like Margot Lee Shetterly put into the original stories that the films come from. So they have to make sure that they get this. This is now the beginning, so Sandy mentioned that Robeson.
I just want to say, if you look at some of the older actors, and you all may not remember, but a lot of times they insisted on meeting with the people whose parts they were playing, and that gave them a sense of what really needed to come through on film. Today, I guess, is about money, so, they don't encourage them, and the people playing the parts sometimes don't even think about, getting to the person to touch, feel, talk to them, get a sense of them at all. So a lot of this nowadays comes down to just pure money.
Doing anything because the person who has the money says, let's just do a movie on the NASA mathematicians. That screenplay was horrible. Hidden Figures.
But
They could have incorporated math so much better than it did, in a symbolic way. I was like, it was just thrown. You could tell it was literally written in a day. And the actors just, okay, now we'll do it because there's big money behind it. Because the big money people want the film in a week. Let's do it in a week. And it comes all off. As a writer, I'm like, y'all ain't spend no time with this. Horne writes that Robeson, when he started growing in consciousness, did not so much film work, he did more stage work. And in the 30s and 40s, the playwright and the director went back and forth. The script was changed often. They got into a place where, as it was performed nightly, the words were sounding right and had a deeper emotional connection with the person telling the story rather than the one-time, one-shot film industry, which is film at one take, you don't get to improve upon it. He valued the craft of stage, Robeson did. That's why he is the most prolific Othello, in my estimation, in the East Coast. They wanted him to perform that nightly. And I'm sure you had audience members moved by his nightly performance that would take Othello in a direction one night and in a different direction the next night, that freedom. I need to finish up in 5 minutes because I'm already over my 2 o'clock limit. Chapter 6, Black Stalin, is called that because Horne quotes from the New York Times saying that, because Robeson said what he said in 1949, that black should not fight in World War II while they're being Jim Crowed at home, he was accused of being a Black Stalin. And I'm glad that Horne put a question mark after that because it shows, in my opinion, a clear betrayal of the liberal media against him. They want him to stay in this box and not have his own thoughts. His 7th chapter is called Robeson, primary victim of the blacklist. He, after he made that statement, started being threatened. And like I mentioned earlier, what I appreciate about Horne's biography is that he shows the police siding with private property in ways that Duberman does not. So I took out these quotes from the 7th chapter. The police joined in smashing the windows. The police entered the hall aggressively, but not one white person moved. And so he was getting attacked from the police, but also by big money interests. Horne writes, his dream was being overridden by a tidal wave of American exceptionalism. And that wasn't really a term that was known in Robeson's lifetime. But I appreciate Horne trying to explain Robeson's life with terms that are now in the academic discourse, like this notion that America does what it wants when it wants, American exceptionalism. Well, Horne says it kind of began in the late 40s with people turning on him. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the black bourgeoisie turning on him, in addition to the liberal mainstream turning on him, was for Horne an example of American exceptionalism. The idea that if you don't support America being an exception in the world, you're America's enemy. But if you know U.S. history, John Brown, Richard Allen, George Washington, they were never supporters of American exceptionalism. And so another issue of Robeson's life is that Horne talks about is the Freedom newspaper. I wrote my dissertation on the Freedom newspaper. And the way that Horne talks about freedom is kind of like a stepchild. Horne treats Freedom newspaper as a stepchild, when really that whole freedom, what Paul Robeson Jr. calls the freedom family, that like helps world consciousness, because the way that they rescue the attack is remarkable, is beyond words. The way that they continue to record when record stores that you go to buy RPMs banned Robeson from 1950. The Freedom family is that family like his older brother, Ben Robeson, who I know Miss Michael's father knows directly, who had a church in New York where, Paul Robeson would stay. That is the family that helped to revive him when the nation and the wealthy, what Horne calls the U.S. ruling elite, wanted to tear him down after 1950. That Freedom family is what restored his name. All right. Horne's terminology focuses on the Freedom family's scarcity